Welcome to the next in Fractions peer-to-peer webinar series. I'm Nigel Bizzles-Baldwin, co-founder at Fraction. Maybe just pop over the next slide, Vincent, as you're driving. Just to set out a little bit more about Fraction, really our bold ambition is to change how pharma works, really how work gets done in pharma. And really the webinars are underpinning many of these things, in that we are able to provide industry-leading expertise across our global cross-functional network. In just over a year, we have a network spanning the globe, right away from West Coast in US, across the US, through UK, Europe, and down into Asia. And we've even had work opportunity in Australia a few months ago. So really a truly global network. And also key to this, that we're very well connected across the community and really enabling an exchange of ideas and providing solutions, as you'll maybe hear in today's webinar also. And with all that, really trying to shape the future of the biopharma industry, how the issues are dealt with, but also how we work again. And that's sort of predominantly around Fraction's fractional deployment model. So let's just set out Fraction a little bit for everybody. Next slide, Vincent. So really the important part today is the webinar kindly presented today by Vincent Marguier. Vincent will be presenting from risks to requirements, an approach to project initiation. So with that, actually, Vincent is a certified project consultant with actually over 18 years of experience in various life science organizations. Really, for me, Vincent specialises in translating ambiguous briefs into detailed and structured execution plans and really bridging the gap between business and the technology. How do you create the business from tech coming through in your development? Also, and I know this is key to Vincent, he actually also enjoys being a lecturer around project management and spends many of his days doing that. And I think he'll share some of that with us in his presentation coming up. So with that, over to you, Vincent, and look forward to your presentation.
That's all, Nigel. I'll try not to be too academic today, because first of all, because I hate that as a pupil, actually. So I'm more looking for an exchange, and you have to see that, sharing, insights and methodology. I mean, the topic today is really about risks leading to requirements. And the presentation is mainly, designed for project managers. But as I mentioned, Nigel, it's always good when you work as part of a project team, actually, to know how project managers really tick, and then what's in their minds, and how you can actually support what they do as much as they can support you. And risk management is actually a dynamic component of any project, where risks, but also opportunities, which could be seen as kind of positive risks, must constantly be assessed and monitored to deliver in the most successful way. However, we get sometimes so carried away by the excitement of starting a project that we tend to jump straight into mapping out what must be delivered for the end user and the stakeholders, thus managing risk and opportunities along the way. I must admit, I used to do that in my early projects, and although I did my best to schedule regular risk management reviews with my project teams, it was clearly not the most glamorous activity we undertook. On the contrary, I got a clear feeling that my teammates were dragging their feet when we dealt with risk and opportunity assessments. They understood the reason and impact of doing it, but it was not part of the project culture as such. Therefore, risk management was an activity just put behind. As I moved into more complex drug development projects within the pharma industry, I realized that risk management had to be at the forefront of what we did, because since the end user was eventually a patient, we had to reduce the risk factor to the very strict acceptable minimum. It meant that a lot of constraints had to be considered for different reasons, whether compliance, ethics, regulatory, scientific, clinical, you name it, which led to various risk responses and mitigation strategies, which in turn would have an impact on the product development. Then comes the idea of putting risks ahead of requirements, since in this case, the risk response may tell us what we shouldn't do and sometimes what we must do. Plus, with every risk mitigation strategy, we get an overview of time, costs, and resources, which anyway are the information we need for proper work breakdown structures of requirements. Do you see where I'm getting at? Additionally, as project managers may know, risk and opportunity assessment is a great team building activity because no matter what the expertise of the project team member is, it all comes together when defining a situation that may arise and impact the product and the project. It puts everyone on the same page. And since we deal with risk straight from the start, it creates this risk culture that the project team would always refer to because it's simply one of the very first major activities they did together. This type of team building activity also sets the scene of how the project will be run. First, by empowering the team members. After all, they are the experts who can find the best way to mitigate these risks. Second, by keeping them focused and aligned, as several risks may require several types of expertise to be manageable. And finally, by helping define product requirements in a more contextual way.
Yeah. Vincent, can I just step in? Have you advanced any of the slides, actually?
Yes, that's the introduction, because that will come anyway. Don't worry.
Just going to ask my audience if that's the case.
No, because then
Vincent,
we're going to step
carry on.
into the whole methodology, really. So that's only the introduction. But then I would always say it's always easier to start with, something already outlined rather than, a blank sheet of paper. So what we'll see together today in the next slide, actually, is a small methodology to achieve this and what the project manager should particularly take care of. Full disclaimer, there is nothing new here, only things that we already do as project managers, but reshuffled and repacked in a different way. So the examples I will use for illustration purposes are taken from my own experience within the pharma industry, but I'm confident that you will easily adapt them to your own projects. So the starting point of every project, as you know, is a scope. And the project manager must make sure this is perfectly stated and agreed with the project sponsor, who ultimately remains accountable for the delivery of the projects. The scope indicates the end user, whether in a specific market or not, and this makes an excellent gateway to the next step. So once the project scope is outlined, identifying the stakeholders is to me the next most important activity, as it provides some of the context and environments the project team will evolve in. There are several ways to do so. What I usually do is to map out some assumptions like you see on the screen and discuss them with the project team during a kickoff meeting to trigger additional thoughts. Again, I find it more effective to provide something, even if it is wrong, rather than nothing at all. And I tend to place the end user in the middle to make sure the team keeps the focus on this main stakeholder. Stakeholders can be of any sorts and from any environments, and some may not be obvious at first. So make sure you cover them all and you continuously manage them. So the scope is defined, stakeholders are identified, so we can now start what I call the project initiation journey, which is basically the sequence of all the activities that must be carried out to create what we call the PID in project management, project initiation documents. And also sometimes the TPP, the target product profile in drug development, which may then be presented for approval if a stage gate validation process is in place within the company. So sometimes in project management, you have different gates you need to go through to get validation from an executive board, for instance. There are different ways of making this journey. What you see here is a simplified way used to show where the risk and opportunity assessment takes place. We will therefore focus on this first part, which aims to provide a shortcut to define the requirements and the more regular activities which follow, as I mentioned, the work breakdown structure, the definitive resources, timelines, etc. The project manager may consider that some optional prerequisites are in place before starting this risk and opportunity assessment, namely SWOTs, high-level assumptions, and a context diagram. The SWOT, that's something you may be familiar with, especially within the life science industry. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And SWOT is a tool which I find useful to complement the stakeholder analysis, since it provides more context outside the stakeholders, more context environments, both from an internal perspective and also from an external perspective. And it can be applied to any project, and any project team can use it. And it's not overtly complicated when done as a team. The outcome of SWOT analysis also provides some elements that will be used in the risk and opportunity assessments. Some obviously straight out of opportunities and threats, but others coming more from the internal side. So as a project manager, I spent a bit of time with the team on these 4 definitions that you see on screen to make sure they're clearly understood before I ask the team to apply them. So how to apply SWOT? So I do it like a small team building exercise, really, which may serve as an appetizer for what follows. So once the team understood the SWOT principles, ask the person who initiated the project, either the project sponsor or the mandate, to tell the team what the project is all about, what the expected delivery and outcome should be, whether in terms of benefits, revenue, story, experience, what have you, the expected timelines, the available budgets, all in, details, but just like telling a story. In the meantime, ask the project team members to identify the statements that could qualify as strength, weakness, opportunity, or threats in their own individual way. There is no right and wrong answer, since every team member will perceive things differently based on his or her expertise. This part here should take maximum 20 minutes. Then take about 40 minutes to reconcile. That's where the project manager leads and facilitates the discussion with the team. What strength have you identified? What weakness, etc.? Let the team share what they wrote down. But as a project manager, make sure you always keep the ball rolling and do not hesitate to challenge them whenever you think it may be relevant. As mentioned earlier, the outcome of this exercise is to bring more context and perspective to the project delivery by highlighting what we do best, what we struggle with, where we may have opportunities, and what we need to keep an eye on. Remember, here we're just setting up the scene, but we're not yet into requirements per se. And usually after such session, I suggest a short break with my team because it may become a bit tense sometimes. So it's good to have, kind of refreshments. Another tool actually that I find useful is to prepare a short list of high-level assumptions together with the project sponsor ahead of the meeting with the project team, which may bring additional context. So those are usually based on experience, maybe certain or not certain at all, with an impact that may vary completely, but it provides the project team with something better than, well, nothing again. Their expertise will contribute establishing assumptions with a higher certainty. So it is the role of the project manager to make sure the team focuses on assumptions with the highest uncertainty first, to clear them up until they move into something more certain and more impactful. Doing this exercise ahead of the risk and opportunity assessment create a light framework for product requirements and will help the team focus more on the elements that really matter within the scope of the project. The third optional prerequisite is a context diagram. And that's an option I use myself and I find it particularly useful, since having different elements and assumptions with their dependencies represented in a graphic way may help the team go into more detail. Just don't overdo it. That was my learning for the first time. Because otherwise you don't know where to start, where to finish, all the dependencies, etc. Really stick to, the overall or the main scope of the projects, what it's all about. Because if you overdo it, you may restrain the thoughts of your team members, and well, that's not what you want. You want them to be creative in the end. So make sure that sticks to something like this. I mean, it's typical product development. That example. Start with: do we have that molecule in the literature, an active ingredient? What formulation do we have? So with formulation comes safety, patient experience, all the regulatory framework behind. And then, okay, let's start with this. And then we'll have time to move to packaging, shelf life, and all these kind of things in the later stage. So there are these three, let's say, prerequisites I suggest we do ahead of that risk and opportunity assessment. So now let's talk about definitions. So risk management principles. So now that, well, we're going to get into them, and it is an obvious activity for a project manager, but it might not be so for other team members. And I faced this situation several times in the past with colleagues who were not at all familiar with these concepts. Therefore, I always make sure I do a quick and simple training or a reminder of how I would like the risk and opportunity assessment to be done and what I expect from them. Rest assured, we're not going to go into quantitative risks and all these kind of mathematical considerations. It's really purely qualitative here. So the project manager should start by explaining the difference between risk and issue to the project team. That's fundamental. The risk is something that could occur in the future, is an uncertainty that can create plans that we can create plans and strategies for and can be accepted. An issue is something that has occurred or is currently happening. It could be an anticipated or unexpected risk that has materialized. It is something that we need to address in the present, and it cannot be accepted. It needs mitigation. So in a nutshell, a risk might happen, an issue has happened. Make sure the team understood this difference and feel free to remind them during the session, because it will always come over. It's like, and your role as a project manager is to tell them, no, that's an issue, so it's not part of what we're doing. Excuse me. Risk statements are a short description of risk that everyone in the organization, from the CEO to the lowest level, can read and get a clear idea of how an event can affect it if it were to occur. Some examples of risk statements: if a person swims too far away from the beach, they may be bitten by a shark which may lead to serious injury or death. If event, then consequence, which may have an impact. If a person falls from a boat into the ocean, they may be bitten by a shark, which may lead to serious injury or death. So we have a different event here with the same consequence and the same impact, but that's still another risk statement. So really insist on the if-then impact formats, which will help the team formulate the ideas in a quick and easy way. So it may happen that the consequence and impact are always the same reductive one. For example, well, then we can't launch the products. That's a classic. So the project manager's role in this case is to accompany the thought process of the team member to be as precise as possible, using, for instance, root cause analysis, 5 why technique, or coaching questions, just to find, yeah, we can't launch the product, but be a bit more precise. Why can't we launch the product if that event occurs? Some risks may be extremely technical or specific, and not all the team members, including the project manager, will understand them. So in this case, the project manager asks for a short explanation. This time will not be wasted because it will allow the team to learn something new outside their respective expertise. And this is to be valued within the project team. Rating the probability and the severity of project risks helps the project manager identify which risks the team should focus their efforts on and which ones to communicate to stakeholders. So simply said, risk probability, how likely is the risk to happen? Risk severity, if the risk were to occur, what would be the overall impacts on the project? Sorry. Risk can be assessed in different ways according to the governance in place. 3x3 or 5x5 matrices are common ways of doing so. The definition of high, medium, low may also depend on the governance, but it is usually quite like the example displayed on screen. The project manager should focus most of the team efforts in the red zone and keep monitoring the risk in the orange zone. But like for the risk statements, not all the risks are red. Make sure you accompany the thought process using, for example, the techniques I mentioned earlier. So finally, once the risk and the opportunity has been clearly stated and prioritized, what will the response strategy be? So I usually consider the 3 following types: accept, retain the risk by informed decision and monitor. So be careful. This is not pretending the risk doesn't exist. Mitigate or reduce. So define and execute an action plan to either reduce likelihood and or severity to an acceptable level and increase detectability of risk, or eliminate the risk completely within the defined period. And lastly, avoid, not to start or continue with the activity that creates the risk. So for project managers here, transfer is also a classic response in risk strategies. To me, it belongs more to the overall mitigate and reduce response. Transferring a risk is simply transferring it to another organization, clearly from a pharma company to a CDMO, for instance. This is a risk that you could transfer. They're responsible for it, but ultimately, you are still accountable for that risk. So all these concepts are well understood by a project team. The project manager can now run the risk and opportunity assessment workshop. We're going to have 3+ sessions here. The first session, together with the entire team, should focus on stating risks and opportunities. Remember the if, then, impact formats. And at the end of it, there should be a classification per type of expertise required to manage the risk and the opportunity. So this is where sub-teams within the project team are formed. And the objective of these sub-teams is to assess the risk and opportunity in further details, prioritizing them and define the response. So typically in a drug development program or project, you may have a team dedicated to preclinical, clinical, team dedicated to medical, another team dedicated medical and patients, another team dedicated to legal, compliance, regulatory, and maybe another team for another specialty, depending on all the different risks that you mapped. So typically, stating risk and opportunity should be done in one session. The duration depends on the size and the scope of the project, but half a day is usually a good start because it is pretty intense. And the work done by the sub-teams should take 2 to 3 weeks. So the project manager should lead each of these sessions and encourage the teams to give their best and coach the team, accompany the teams on how to prioritize risks, how to assign likelihoods, severity, impact, and discuss risk responses. And actually, the risk response part within the sub-teams is the one that will matter the most, because it is where all the ideas about what has to be put in place, how it should be designed, what constraint has to be respected, how much time it will take, etc., will come to life. If you ask me, I mean, that looks very much like defining the requirements for the products, but within the framework, the project manager prepared ahead using SWOT analysis, high-level assumptions, context diagram, or any other tool or concept that support actually that approach. The last session mirrors the first one, where the sub-teams are back together as a whole team to reconcile and discuss their risk responses, and therefore agreed on the requirements to be defined, because some of the responses from a sub-team may depend on the ones from another. So mapping this dependency may provide insight on, well, adjusted timelines, cost, resources needed, just like in a regular product requirement session. So requirements can then be further detailed using tools, techniques like MOSCAL, must have, should have, could have, won't have, target product profile, etc. And that's where the project goes back onto the standard project management track. So as a conclusion, what we've seen today is yet another way to start a project. It requires a bit of preparation up front, depending on how best the project manager wants to run this approach. So remember SWOT analysis to involve the team with the environment and the context of the project. High-level assumptions to make the team map out some rough ideas within the framework. Context diagram to visualize key elements, assumptions, and their dependencies to help define the impact if one of these elements is at risk. The risk and opportunity assessment can start, the team fully into that risk mindset, which in turn will help generate mitigation strategies that will eventually lead to requirements. You may think it is unconventional, and I got that remark several times actually with my former project sponsor, and I agree, it seems unsettling at times. But when you manage to outline from the beginning what you expect from the team and how things will be run, the approach pays off. First, because you form the project team by giving them a common task, specifically risk management, which may not be what they prefer, therefore gradually developing that risk mindset. Second, because you relied on the team members to freely give their perspectives. You provide the structure, they provide the expertise, and from my experience, they feel empowered when doing so. And that's a major component of performance project teams. And finally, because you moved into the product requirements in a more contextual way rather than from a blank sheet of paper. So my question to you, will you take the risk to use this approach in your next project? I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoy this approach, which may or may not be original, and I'm happy to take all the questions and to open discussion.
Well, thank you, Vincent, for taking us through that. I think, if nothing else, a very valuable reminder. I mean, working often in sort of a biotech startup environment, entrepreneurial spirit, and we shouldn't, detract from that. But often we run off in different directions very quickly, and it's important to come together and put structure and a plan around what you're doing and put some risk mitigation strategies around that. So that's just my 2 pence, if you like. But we should open the floor up for discussion. Any comments, questions from the group? Please come online or place anything into the chat.
I'll ask a question if that's all right, Vincent.
Hi, Paul. Yeah.
If without giving away corporate secrets from the projects you've done, are there some good examples where you've got those epiphanies where this process outed something that absolutely nobody saw, which obviously reinforces the strength of why you would do it as a precursor to getting down?
I think that's exactly how I kind of created that methodology, because with the project team I had, and I was big development projects. We're talking about consumer health, US markets. So consumer health being a bit of a minefield here, because you cannot make claims without substantiation. So there's a risk already here. On medical devices as well, and inhalation. So I mean the worst cases of everything. But we were running around in circles at some point. It was impossible to focus. And that's where I really rebranded all these context diagrams and dependencies together. It's like, well, guys, let's re-kick off the whole thing. But we'll start with, a risk and opportunity assessment. And my sponsor, who was a true marketer, told me, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, you trust me this time. You do your part, you tell the story, what exactly you want to see in the markets, and then I run the show and we'll see how it works. And within 1 hour, I mean, everybody was aligned from compliance, legal, regulatory, scientific, engineers, quality, etc., because they really enjoyed it. The thing that they enjoyed is like, it was refreshing. That's what they said. It's not like, well, what's your quality, what's your name, round table, etc. It's just, well, it just jump together, within that situation. Let's exchange ideas as quickly as possible, as in the most effective way. And then that was reflected when we created the sub-teams. We had 5 sub-teams at the end of the session. One was on preclinical and scientific, one was legal, regulatory, compliance together, medical, marketing, another one I forgot. And I led each and every session separately. I was like, wow, there's going to be a lot of dependencies, when they will come back together. And it happens. So we spend another half day together just to discuss, all the responses. Yeah, but that depends on that. But legally, you can't do that. And that's not compliance. And if you cross a state in the US, then you may have, a federal offense, etc., what have you. So, wow, okay, risk register. I think it was something like 70 statements already at first. Well, that's good, because we have 75% of the requirements. We know that we can't do that. So what we have to do is precisely this. What's left is basically the shape of the thing, of the product, which is something purely marketing, but with human factor studies. But that will take at a later stage. So it was the epiphany, as you mentioned, Paul, because people were like, wow, in 4 weeks, we achieved, we were trying to do for the last, month, really, together. So it is effective. And people like it because it is new. I ran that on a smaller project with 2 scientists, and the pure scientists expertise, they had no idea about risks whatsoever. So I think that short training is like try to be creative a bit, think about what may happen and what would be the impact. Well, we can't launch the product. Well, be a bit more precise, please. And they loved it. And they told me the next time, hey, next time we'll start a project like this, because really it is creative and we feel empowered as a project member. Well, that feels great, really.
Thank you, Vincent.
That's really what I like as a project manager. It's really to empower the team and to support them in, bringing the best out of the expertise.
Vincent. So, Dave, I know you're a busy chap over recent days, but you have a question.
A couple of thoughts, really. So, first of all, thank you very much. Nice and clear. Love the simplicity of it. Really easy tools to use. It's always brilliant to hear people who are experts in their field simplifying something in a way that ordinary folk like me can get their head around. So thank you for that. I've often thought about, 2020's hindsight is a wonderful thing, is that you get to the end of a project and you see all the things that have gone wrong, or we should have been able to foresee that, and you just swept that all away immediately by doing the risks to start with. We understand what the likely problems are. There might be some black swans out there. So I think as an approach, it's wonderful, isn't it? And it sounds.
But for your point, Dave, here, I mean, a good practice is to use project lessons from previous projects as well, so that you inject into this when you start. So you know exactly, well, we had that risk before actually, so we know what we did.
Yeah.
And well, that risk is a bit different. So let's see how we're gonna tackle that one within that new context. So project lessons really help as well as a prerequisite, I would say.
Yeah, well, next thing I guess is a question. We're talking about this in the context of project management and projects which could be quite big things like product launches. I tried to get my head around some of this in a previous life, working with a quality team to understand the risk grids that you put up, but more with a view to describing it as a tool in market access. So healthcare systems are subject to decision-making under uncertainty. If we can articulate the risks in the way you just described, isn't that going to be helpful for them to make the decision for us? And it almost felt you were talking about a little bit around that in the devices context in that project, that things we can't do, now we know what we can do, and so on. So what are your thoughts about that?
I think it's spot on as well for market access, because market access is, that's the kingdom of stakeholders, really, in the pharma industry. Outside prescribers and the patients, but we have so many stakeholders here that we have to manage. Remember, that's the second point. We have a clear scope and stakeholders. That's the pool of stakeholders we have, from payers, health insurance, authorities, what have you, etc. So how are we going to organize them or orchestrate them together, right? With the product we want to launch in the market. And again, the approach is still the same. Well, let's map out all the risks. The risk in this case may be more into reputation, communication, pricing that will come as well on market access, and authority. And then we may also consider the patient, because, well, what happens with the patient will still link to reputation ultimately. But it works as well, because, you have your pool of stakeholders here. Now, well, we need to be able to launch on the market based on what we have, or the clinical studies that are underway. What may happen, or where can it go wrong, really? And that's where actually in a sub-project for a specific launch, you may want to use this as well, so that you make sure you cover everything, or you have everything covered, and you have a mitigation for each and every risk, and maybe each and every stakeholder, actually, so that you can address to make that launch successful. Does it make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, it really does. And I think that you can think of some different examples where it might include clinical uncertainties if we haven't done that work early enough. So we've got the market and the evidence package isn't as robust as we would like, or it's been, really downgraded by one of the health authorities. What can we do functionally with that? Well, we can talk about the risks inherent in that and what the mitigations might be for a healthcare system to help them decide, so we can get more access. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Welcome. That risk, actually, that works for an internal project. If you think commercial excellence, for instance, I like to roll out a new CRM business analytics. So you users, typically, they're going to be sales forces, right? Whether medical or field reps. But then you still need to ask yourself, well, are they really going to use the system? If not, then what you want is obviously that they use the system in the most diligent way. So if that's the scope, well, what should you consider as a risk, actually? Well, it has to be simple, it has to be clear, all the data have to be there, etc. So, and if not, then what? So my vendor has to make sure that all the data are up to date within 3 or 4 days, that I don't get any complaint from the field rep who's ringing the bell, but the healthcare professional doesn't work there anymore, etc., etc. So it works for everything, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I don't know if there's any other questions, hands up, so please feel free to come online. But if not, maybe Vincent, a question for me, just thinking about project initiation. Often groups, multiple stakeholders will come together, different personality types, perhaps strangers to each other, perhaps with different views on what their level of risk may be. Any advice, how do you begin to put those soup of people together to come around the common goal and the plan?
It's a good question. I think that should be the topic for next webinar on stakeholder management, actually, which is how to manage them. There are obviously techniques to manage your stakeholders with grids. That one is supportive and happy. That one is not supportive, not happy at all. That one is just interested. That one is just kind of toxic anyway. So really, when you do this stakeholder analysis, it's not just one slide as I presented, but it really is the second big part of the job after the scope. Like, well, who am I going to deal with internally, externally? And internally, I might have my project team, but then they have their managers. They're connected to, or influenced by, you have the executives, you have the sponsors, you have people that clearly don't want that project to be delivered for whatever reason, but that may happen. So you need to really map them out as a project manager, and you have your own file on stakeholder management, really. That stakeholder. So Nigel here, yeah, he's supportive. I know he's going to help me, even though he's not part of my organization.
Usually a troublemaker, really.
Yes. Bruce here, well, I mean, that project is going to have a big impact on what he's working on right now. So I need to make sure that we align together to find that kind of win-win compromise so that he gets on board, he doesn't derail my project, and I don't derail his. So all this kind of analysis and interactions. So it's really, you have to take that at individual basis within an organization. And then outside the organization, that's a group of patients, that's your group of payers. These are the pool of prescribers. That's the press. Let's not forget the press. Because when they have a bad word to say about the pharma industry, they usually do. And independent experts and, all the caregivers, let's not forget them either. So we have the patient, the caregivers, they're also stakeholders. For heavy diseases, well, they're there for the patients. So we need to include them in what we do in the discussion. So, and then it goes really, well, step by step, how do I inform them? On what basis? So that's another technique you have. Some stakeholders, you need to inform them, day by day or week by week. Some of them once a week or once a month is enough. Some of them once in a while, in a big meeting together every quarter, for instance. But this has to be really mapped out before you move to the next step. So that that communication is in place with all your stakeholders, and you always keep them aligned and you're transparent with them, depending on what level of information you need to share with them or they'll be interested in.
Yeah, so
did I answer the question?
Absolutely. Probably stakeholder management is much more difficult and even more important than the science, perhaps. But
that's 80% of the job of a project manager. Yeah. It's just communication and stakeholder management.
Yes, no, I agree for sure, Vincent. So Bruce has been a little bit quiet there, but he has put a question online. I don't know if you want to speak up, Bruce, or
Yeah, you beat me to it, Nigel. I was going to say, any launch process, all the different steps from initial molecule onwards, is there a spot in the process where you tend to identify the most risks?
Not really, because at the beginning you do with what you have and what you can anticipate. But then as you move along in the process, you will identify new risks. And then based on the scale you have and the criticity of that risk, then they may shift. Well, that one we had, at the beginning is not so important anymore because we had it covered and monitored. But that new one that emerged, actually, well, we need to actually put our attention on it for the next 2-3 months, phases, etc., until another risk comes. And that's the beauty of creating that risk mindset within the team, because they come up naturally when you do a project meeting, they come up with, well, I identified something that we need to take care of. They're like, well, let's put that in the grid, let's assess that priority, likelihood, severity, is that important? Okay, well, let's actually take care of that risks. And that goes back to Nigel's questions like, well, we identified something new. So that's where you actually inform your stakeholders like, something may be coming here. We have that under control. This is being monitored, it's being assessed. We're putting a response in place. Stay tuned for, let's say, that response. So it's actually extremely dynamic. There's no, well, that's where we're going to have all the risk and then not anymore. Because as you know well, you identify risks at the beginning and then you have everything covered until the launch. And when you press the launch button to, commercial loans, that all hell breaks loose, as you know, exactly. So everything you planned doesn't go according to the plan. And then that's a risk that, well, you also have to consider.
Very good.
Vincent, another question. This is all about risks, but it goes alongside opportunities. You obviously start with a SWOT. SWOT has threats in it, which of course are a first attempt at risks, but what this does is it smokes out far more. Equally, we've talked mostly about risks. Does this also surface opportunities that were not spotted in the SWOT, and therefore we see potential market positions in this that then give us advantage through that discussion?
So it does. We had that in our big projects, R&D project as well, that we had like, and the one was, hey, we had a risk with the molecule, it's like, clearly straight from the beginning, from the core of the project, like, if we change that molecule, then we could have something a bit more, and that molecule was, if we change the molecule to CBD, let's put it that way, to cannabinoid, well, that will create a more, trendy product. It's like, great, well, let's do that. That's a great opportunity. But then with this, we need to map all the risks that come with CBD. And in the state, and CBD, it's highly regulated by states, actually. So you can't produce, in a state and sell in another one, clearly, or maybe that has changed. So that creates another pool of risks, really. So you have that opportunity. It's like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's think about that. Do we have the budget to do that? If so, then, well, let's rescope the projects and then let's restart again with what we have. If not, well, let's park it for, next phase of the project or the next version, really. So opportunities are assessed the same way.
Right.
And then at the end, it depends on the budget you have. Like, oh, well, let's make it better. Well, let's go for that. If there's a proper case that it will be more successful at the end, well, let's use that opportunity. But it has to be assessed just like a risk, but in a more positive way in our case.
Yeah. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you.
okay. Thank you, Paul. So I don't know, I don't see any hands up, any final comments. So if that's the case, I should thank Vincent for a tremendous presentation and very insightful thinking around the project management. Hey, sorry, Dave. Sorry, Dave's clapping. Where's Dave's hand up? But thank you, Dave. So very insightful around the project management piece, and really the importance of getting alignment, agreeing a plan, and agreeing a way forward. But I think, as you said, there's never any perfect plan, Vincent. There's always routes for change as you go, for sure. But I think it's very important that people align that at the very start of any project and see how the project evolves. But with that, I think it again very nicely demonstrates the fractional expertise on offer at Fraction, both in your presentation, but of course with a dialogue across the community we see before us now. So with that, thank you once again, Vincent, and thank you everybody online.